Have you ever wondered why someone who walked away from you suddenly cannot stop thinking about you? Why your name begins to appear in their mind, even when they tried so hard to forget? It seems confusing. Sometimes it feels unfair, because when the avoidant left, it looked so easy for them. They walked away calmly. They created distance. They acted like everything was under control. No emotional scenes, no dramatic breakdown, just silence. And from the outside, it looks like they moved on without looking back. But the human mind is much more complex than what people show on the surface. What you see is not always what they feel. Avoidant people have a unique psychological pattern. Their first instinct, when emotions become intense, is not to fight for connection. Their instinct is to escape it, not because they never cared, but because caring deeply makes them uncomfortable. For them, emotional closeness can feel overwhelming. It can feel like losing control. And control is the one thing the avoidant mind tries to protect at all costs. So when things become too real, too emotional, too deep, they pull away, they create distance, they convince themselves that walking away is the smartest decision. In that moment, their mind is focused on one thing only: relief. Relief from emotional intensity, relief from vulnerability, relief from the feeling of being too exposed. And when they finally create distance, something interesting happens. At first, they feel lighter, they feel free, the silence feels peaceful, no pressure, no expectations, no emotional conversations, just space. And for a while, that space feels exactly like what they needed. They go back to their routine. They focus on work. They spend time with friends. They distract themselves with new experiences. Everything seems normal again. But the human mind has a strange way of processing emotions, especially emotions that were never fully understood. Because when someone truly touches the inner world of an avoidant, the connection does not disappear overnight. It stays quietly, in the background of their mind. At first, they barely notice it. Maybe your name appears in their thoughts for a few seconds. Maybe they remember a conversation. Maybe something small reminds them of you, a song, a place, a phrase you used to say. They shake their head and move on. It's nothing, they tell themselves, just a random memory. But the mind does not work like a switch that turns feelings on and off. The mind remembers what mattered, especially connections that felt different, connections that felt safe, connections that felt real. And slowly, something begins to change. The thoughts become more frequent. Your memory appears when they least expect it, during a quiet drive, while waiting in line somewhere, late at night when the world becomes silent. That is when the avoidant mind becomes the most vulnerable. Because silence removes distraction. And when distractions disappear, thoughts get louder. They begin to remember details, the way you understood them, the way you listened, the way you noticed things about them that most people never see. And that realization creates a quiet tension inside their mind. Because avoidants are very skilled at one thing: suppressing emotions. They learn early in life how to push feelings away, how to stay independent, how to avoid relying too much on anyone. But suppression is not the same as elimination. Just because a feeling is pushed down does not mean it disappears. It waits. And sometimes it waits for the exact moment when the mind becomes still. That is when memories return, not as dramatic emotions, but as persistent thoughts, small reminders, unfinished feelings. And this is the moment many avoidants do not expect, the moment when they start realizing something uncomfortable. You are still on their mind. Even when they tried to move forward, even when they convinced themselves that leaving was the right choice, your presence continues to exist in their mental space. And at first, they resist it. They distract themselves again. They scroll through their phone, they focus on work, they meet new people. But something feels different, because new conversations do not feel the same. New interactions feel lighter, but also emptier. And this is where psychology becomes very interesting. The human brain remembers emotional safety more than anything else. When someone felt deeply understood by another person, the mind stores that experience in a powerful way. It becomes a reference point. And when that reference point disappears, the brain starts searching for it again. That is why the avoidant mind begins to circle back. Not because they planned it, not because they wanted to, but because the mind naturally returns to what once felt meaningful. And slowly, without even realizing it, they start thinking about you more often than they expected. Your presence becomes a quiet echo in their thoughts, and the more they try to ignore it, the louder that echo becomes. Because the truth is simple. You do not stay in someone's mind like that unless you touched something real inside them. But what happens next is where the story becomes even more powerful. Because when avoidants realize they cannot stop thinking about someone, their mind enters a psychological conflict that most people never see, a silent battle between their need for independence and the connection they tried to escape. And when that battle begins, everything inside them starts to shift. In the next part, you will understand why avoidants try so hard to forget someone who meant something real to them, and the surprising psychological reason why forgetting you becomes almost impossible. So stay with this until the end. Because once you understand what is happening inside the avoidant mind, you will never see their silence the same way again. Why does someone who once created distance suddenly struggle to erase a person from their mind? To understand this, you must first understand the inner world of an avoidant. Their behavior often looks cold from the outside. It can look careless. Sometimes it even feels like they never valued the connection at all. But what happens inside them follows a different logic. Avoidant individuals grow up learning one powerful rule: depending on people leads to pain. Somewhere in their past, emotional closeness felt unsafe. Maybe vulnerability was ignored. Maybe feelings were dismissed. Maybe trust was broken. Over time, their mind built a system designed to protect them. That system teaches them to rely only on themselves. Independence becomes their shield. Self-control becomes their comfort zone. Distance becomes their strategy. So when a relationship begins to grow deeper, something unusual starts happening in their emotional system. The bond becomes meaningful, but meaning also brings exposure. Being seen too clearly feels risky. Letting someone enter their emotional space feels like standing without armor. The closer the relationship becomes, the stronger their inner alarm begins to ring. That alarm does not speak in clear words. It appears as restlessness. It appears as the urge to create space. It appears as the sudden belief that something is wrong, even when nothing actually is. Their mind begins searching for reasons to pull away. They might focus on small imperfections. They might convince themselves the relationship is moving too fast. They might feel an unexplained pressure to regain personal space. This reaction is not always logical. It is psychological protection. To the avoidant mind, emotional intensity feels similar to losing control of their own world, and losing control is something their brain has been trained to avoid, so they step back. And when they finally create distance, their nervous system experiences temporary calm. It feels like stepping out of a crowded room into fresh air. The pressure disappears, the expectations fade, life becomes quiet again. At this stage, they often believe the decision solved everything. They tell themselves the connection was not right. They convince themselves independence is better. They focus on moving forward, but something important begins happening beneath the surface. When someone brought genuine understanding into their life, that experience leaves an imprint. It is not just another interaction. It becomes a reference in their memory. The mind starts comparing every future experience to what it once felt, and this comparison begins quietly. They might meet new people. Conversations happen, laughter happens, social life continues. From the outside, everything looks perfectly normal, but internally, something feels different. The emotional depth they once experienced is not easily recreated. The comfort they once felt is not easily replaced. The feeling of being understood without explaining every detail becomes rare. This realization does not arrive all at once. It appears slowly. During simple moments, a thought passes through their mind. Someone once understood me better than most people. That thought might only last a few seconds. Yet it returns again later, and again another day. Human psychology works in interesting ways. The brain naturally remembers environments where it felt safe to express itself. When that safety disappears, the mind continues searching for it. That is why memories begin resurfacing more often. Not as dramatic emotion, but as quiet recognition. They begin remembering how conversations used to flow easily. They recall how certain things never needed long explanations. They remember how someone noticed their mood even when they tried to hide it. That level of awareness is uncommon, and the avoidant mind slowly recognizes something uncomfortable. Being understood that deeply is not something that happens every day. When this awareness grows, a strange contradiction begins forming inside them. Part of their personality still wants emotional distance. Their defense system still tells them to stay independent. Their protective instincts still encourage them to avoid vulnerability. Yet another part of their mind starts acknowledging the value of what they left behind. This creates internal tension, because now the avoidant must face two conflicting realities. The first reality says space equals safety. The second reality says the connection they experienced was meaningful. Holding both truths at the same time becomes mentally exhausting. Their thoughts begin returning to the same question again and again. Was leaving actually the right decision? That question does not come with an immediate answer. Instead, it opens the door for reflection, and reflection leads to memories. The mind begins revisiting moments that once felt ordinary, moments that now appear more valuable than before. Simple interactions suddenly gain new meaning. This happens because human beings often understand the importance of something only after it becomes absent. When a connection disappears, the brain begins evaluating what was lost. For avoidants, this evaluation happens quietly and privately. They rarely talk about it. They rarely show it openly. Most of this process happens inside their own thoughts, but internally, the awareness keeps growing. They start noticing how rare genuine emotional understanding truly is. They realize that not everyone brings patience into a relationship. Not everyone creates space for them to be themselves without pressure. When someone once offered that kind of presence, the memory stays strong. And slowly, the avoidant begins facing something they tried to escape. They are not simply remembering a person. They are remembering a feeling of being accepted without force, a feeling of being understood without judgment, a feeling that made emotional walls relax for a moment. Once the mind experiences that level of comfort, it does not forget easily. And this is where the real psychological struggle begins, because now their thoughts return more frequently than before. The connection they attempted to leave behind becomes harder to ignore. Every memory becomes a reminder of something rare, something meaningful, something their protective instincts tried to run away from. Once that realization begins growing inside their mind, something deeper starts happening. The silence they once created for comfort slowly turns into a mirror, and that mirror begins reflecting thoughts they tried to avoid. At first, the change is subtle. Nothing dramatic happens on the outside. Life continues moving. Daily routines remain the same. Yet internally, a quiet process begins unfolding. The mind starts replaying experiences, not intentionally, not by choice. It simply happens. Small moments return first. A short conversation, a shared laugh, a simple look that once felt ordinary. These memories appear without warning, like fragments floating through their thoughts. They try to push them away. The avoidant personality has always relied on emotional control. When something feels uncomfortable, their instinct is to move away from it mentally. They distract themselves. They keep busy. They shift attention toward other things, but memory has its own rhythm. The more they attempt to dismiss it, the more frequently it returns. Not because the mind wants to cause pain, but because unresolved emotional experiences naturally seek understanding. Psychology explains this in a simple way. When something meaningful ends without emotional closure, the brain keeps revisiting it, trying to make sense of it. This creates a loop. Thoughts return, questions appear, reflections follow, and slowly, the avoidant begins examining the past in a way they never allowed themselves before. They begin noticing details that once felt insignificant, the patience that was shown to them, the way someone stayed calm during difficult moments, the way conversations created a sense of ease. Those small details start forming a bigger picture, and that picture becomes harder to ignore. Because the more they reflect, the more they understand something important. Not every person offered the same emotional space. Not every interaction created the same level of understanding. That comparison begins quietly. New interactions may feel pleasant, but something feels missing. Words are exchanged, but the depth feels different. People listen, yet the connection does not reach the same level of comfort. This realization introduces a strange tension. They once believed distance would bring clarity. Instead, distance brings contrast. The absence of a certain presence becomes noticeable. Human beings often recognize the value of something only after experiencing its absence. This psychological effect changes perception. What once felt ordinary now appears rare, and this awareness becomes stronger with time. The avoidant mind begins replaying more memories, not just random ones, but the ones connected to emotional safety. Moments where they felt understood without needing to explain everything. Moments where someone noticed subtle changes in their mood. Moments where silence between two people still felt comfortable. Those experiences begin standing out more clearly now, and with every memory, the mind forms a deeper question. Why did I walk away from something that felt genuine? This question does not arrive with immediate regret. Instead, it creates curiosity first. Curiosity leads to reflection. Reflection leads to emotional awareness. The avoidant starts recognizing something they once overlooked. Connection was present in a way they had rarely experienced before. At the time, that closeness may have triggered fear. Emotional exposure felt unfamiliar. Being understood too deeply can feel overwhelming for someone used to protecting their inner world. So the easiest response was withdrawal, but now the environment is different. Without the emotional intensity that once triggered their defenses, they begin viewing the past through a calmer lens. The protective alarm that once demanded distance becomes quieter, and when that alarm quiets down, the mind becomes capable of seeing things more clearly. This is when recognition begins to grow. They start understanding that the connection they experienced was not ordinary. It had depth, it had emotional presence. It had a level of patience that is not easily found, and that realization slowly shifts the way they see everything. Their earlier decision begins looking different now. What once felt like protection starts appearing more like avoidance of something meaningful. This realization creates an internal conflict. Part of them still values independence. That part reminds them how comfortable emotional distance once felt. But another part of their awareness begins acknowledging something deeper. Someone once entered their world in a way very few people ever did. That thought becomes difficult to ignore. The mind starts revisiting conversations. Words that once seemed simple now carry new meaning. Certain gestures appear more thoughtful than they first realized. Even ordinary moments begin carrying emotional weight. This reflection process slowly transforms how they view the past. Instead of remembering only the pressure they once felt, they start recognizing the support that existed as well. Instead of focusing only on the discomfort of vulnerability, they begin seeing the trust that was offered. And this shift in perception becomes powerful, because once the mind starts recognizing value, it naturally returns to it again and again. Thoughts begin circling back during quiet moments, while walking alone, while driving somewhere, while sitting in silence at night. Each reflection deepens their awareness. They begin realizing that the person they left behind was not easily replaceable, not because of grand gestures or dramatic experiences, but because of something far more powerful, genuine emotional presence. And once the mind truly recognizes the rarity of that kind of presence, forgetting becomes much harder than they ever expected. What once seemed easy begins feeling complicated. What once looked like a simple decision begins revealing emotional layers they had never examined before. And slowly, without announcing it to anyone, the avoidant starts facing a truth that grows stronger every day. Some connections leave a lasting imprint on the mind, not because someone forced their way into their thoughts, but because something real once existed there. As this awareness grows stronger, the avoidant begins facing something they spent most of their life trying to escape. Their inner defenses, which once felt strong and protective, begin to feel less certain. The distance that once brought comfort now creates an unusual emptiness. This is the moment where a deeper psychological shift begins. For a long time, the avoidant believed independence was the safest place to live emotionally. Relying only on themselves felt stable. Keeping emotional space between themselves and others felt smart. It protected them from disappointment. It protected them from feeling too exposed. But human beings are not designed to live without meaningful emotional bonds. Even people who value independence still carry a natural desire to be understood. Deep inside every person exists a need to be seen for who they truly are. This need does not disappear simply because someone learned to hide it. It stays quiet, waiting. And when someone once managed to reach that quiet place inside them, the experience becomes unforgettable. That is why the avoidant begins noticing something unusual happening within their thoughts. Your presence starts appearing in moments when they least expect it, not through dramatic emotions, but through steady reminders. A memory during a quiet evening, a familiar phrase echoing in their mind, a situation where they instinctively think about how you would have understood it. These thoughts are not forced, they arrive naturally. The mind remembers environments where it once felt emotionally comfortable, even if the person experiencing that comfort did not fully recognize it at the time. And slowly, the avoidant starts understanding something powerful. You did not simply enter their life as another temporary connection. You touched a deeper part of their emotional world. That realization creates a strong internal reaction, because now they must confront something they once denied. The connection meant more than they allowed themselves to admit. At the time, closeness triggered fear. Their protective instincts reacted quickly. Emotional exposure felt overwhelming. Their solution was distance. But now that the situation has changed, the emotional landscape inside them begins shifting. The fear that once pushed them away loses some of its strength. And when fear weakens, clarity begins appearing. The avoidant mind starts observing the past more honestly. They begin recognizing the patience that was given to them. They notice how someone accepted their quiet moments without forcing explanations. They begin realizing how rare it was to meet someone who understood their need for space while still offering warmth. This combination is difficult to find. Most people demand immediate emotional openness. Others walk away when communication becomes difficult. Very few people create an environment where someone can feel both freedom and understanding at the same time. When the avoidant recognizes that this kind of balance once existed, the weight of that awareness becomes strong, because now the connection begins looking more valuable than it once seemed. Their earlier decision starts appearing different in their mind. What once felt like protection begins looking like something else. Avoidance. Avoidance of vulnerability. Avoidance of emotional responsibility. Avoidance of something that required courage. This realization is not easy to face. For someone who spent years believing that emotional distance was the safest path, admitting the importance of a past connection requires humility. But the human mind grows through reflection, and reflection slowly opens the door to emotional truth. The avoidant begins acknowledging something they never expected to admit. You were not simply another chapter in their life. You represented something deeper. You offered presence without pressure. You created understanding without judgment. You gave them a space where they could exist without needing to hide who they were. Experiences like that leave a powerful imprint, and once the mind recognizes the depth of such an experience, ignoring it becomes impossible. Thoughts begin returning again and again, not because they want to feel nostalgic, but because the brain naturally revisits experiences that carried emotional meaning. These reflections slowly change the way they see you. Instead of remembering only the challenges that once triggered their fear, they begin remembering the calm moments as well. Moments where they felt understood. Moments where conversations felt natural. Moments where silence did not feel uncomfortable. Each memory adds another layer of awareness. And with every layer, the truth becomes clearer. You were not someone easy to replace, because what existed between you was not built only on attraction or excitement. It was built on something far more powerful: emotional recognition. You saw parts of them that most people never noticed. And once someone experiences that level of recognition, their mind rarely forgets it. This is the reason the avoidant begins thinking about you more than they expected. Their thoughts are not simply about a person. They are about the feeling that existed when they were around you, a feeling that made their guarded personality relax, a feeling that allowed them to exist without constant self-protection. And now that the distance has created silence, that memory becomes even louder, because the mind always returns to what once felt genuine. Eventually, the avoidant begins understanding something that changes the way they view everything. Running away from a connection does not erase it. It only delays the moment when they must understand its true value. And when that understanding finally arrives, the realization becomes clear. Some people leave an imprint that the mind continues to revisit long after the distance was created. Not because the past refuses to fade, but because something real once lived there.